All right, folks, we are here again for another Fic Night. This month, obviously, the month of September, and we are featuring, as we close out the summer, a story by one of our authors, Chemical Pixie. It's called On Track, featuring some of our favorite next gen characters, but centering around Rose Granger Weasley and interesting moments, we'll say, on the Hogwarts Express. Or surrounding the Hogwarts Express, I should say more accurately. For those who haven't viewed our stream before, um, our Fic Night is something that we do every month to pick out stories that members vote on our website to feature them and kind of have some feedback with the members, with the author, which unfortunately today we're going to have to kind of do in an unorthodox way, be bouncing back and forth between a DM with the author and in my stream here myself. No fault of hers, but still getting used to the wonderful adaptations that YouTube has made to streaming. So as usual, I'm going to start with a reading of the story, and then we'll get the author to jump in afterwards to answer the questions that we've got. And again, this is On Track by Chemical Pixie. It was an unseasonably bright and tepid morning on September the 1st. To a tourist, it would have been a perfect day to walk around the streets of London, basking in the warm sunshine and taking selfies at the city's most historical sites, racking up major social media points to the envy of others. To a native, however, the rays of sunshine and gentle breezes would have been considered uncharacteristic of this time of year. That the Brawleys, for the 10th day in a row, sat in their bags unopened because the area was supposedly being blessed with warm weather. It was nearing 25 degrees at 10:15 as the wisps of clouds melted into the brazen blue of the mid-morning sky. Even with a feather-light charm on her trolley, Rose Granger Weasley still felt beads of sweat slowly rolling down her back. You just had to insist we walk here, grumbled Hugo from behind her. Oh, shut up, you're fine, sniffed Rose as they entered the premises of King's Cross. Think of it as early Quidditch training. The usual morning rush was beginning to die down at this hour, but the Muggle tourists all had their touchscreen mobiles out, trying to figure out which platforms would take them to their desired transportation. Rose felt her forehead begin to furrow. Oh no, we are not talking about this again, warned Hugo, who was finally walking in her stride. He nudged his cart with hers, causing her owl, Gaia, to screech. Hugo, we already stand out with our luggage, and so now you care about standing out? What about when we were walking from Grimmauld Place to the tube with them? Didn't it occur to you then? Rose rolled her eyes. I wasn't the one who forced you to come with me. Friggin' Dad, moaned Hugo. A group of young Muggle girls walked by, and Hugo wiped the sweat from his forehead. Did someone say my name? Boomed Ron Granger Weasley from behind them. Merlin, Dad, Rose cried, turning around with her wand out. Don't do that! Both of the Granger Weasley boys howled with laughter as Rose quickly put away her wand. Head girl, and she still scares so easily, snickered Hugo. I'm surrounded by idiots, thought Rose, aggrieved. Where's Mum? You know her, putting out fires in one office or another, Ron answered. He put his arms around his two children. You'll have to make do with just old Dad. She won't be able to make it today? Hugo asked quietly. She'll try, Hugh, she'll try, sighed Ron. He beckoned them onwards, letting them know about the lovely cup of coffee he got to enjoy from the creature. Uncle Harry's ancient house elf, while they walked to King's Cross. "Why couldn't I apparate with you again?" complained Hugo. Rose rolled her eyes. This topic had nearly been the second blow-up argument of the day. She would have been fine to make the journey to King's Cross by herself. In fact, she would have preferred it, but her dad insisted that Hugo tag along for some sibling bonding. In other words, Ron Granger Weasley still wanted to have a lion and didn't want to be responsible for the mugging and possible kidnapping of his eldest child. No matter how illogical Hugo's arguments against his coming with Rose he made, she's of age. She just wants to leave early to see if they listen to her. I want to sleep in. Classes start tomorrow. I think I sprained my ankle. I can't walk that far. Ron would not relent. And so the Granger Weasley siblings jaunted to King's Cross Station earlier that morning, pushing their featherlight trolleys that Ron had magicked for them the night before. He then got to enjoy the lion that September the 1st rarely promised him, and still be a present dad to see his children off to school by simply apparating to the station. Only 2 more years of this after today, and I'm done, he had thought earlier this morning as Creature woke him up with a cup of coffee. Cannot believe that I couldn't catch a ride with the Potters, Hugo vented to their dad. Rose bit down a retort. She knew why she hadn't caught a ride with her godparents earlier that day, but it seems like her insistence of living to her values was the thorn in Hugo's side today. Or maybe a thorn in Hugo's life. Yeah, that was definitely more accurate. The Granger Weasleys turned the corner and saw the barrier between platforms 9 and 10. Because the Potters had driven, they were probably still parking their car. In the distance, Rose saw the Malfoys disappear onto platform 9 3/4. It was nearing 1/2 past, and Rose wanted time to see if the Department of Magical Transportation had finally answered her demands. As they approached the barrier, Ron stopped her. "Ready for your last time, Rosie?" he asked, squeezing her shoulder. She grinned at her father. "Let's do this." Rose gripped onto her trolley and began to run towards the brick wall. Ever since her first year, she wondered if the barrier would become solid, like it had done for her father and Uncle Harry all those years ago. She thought that her parents had the most marvelous adventures at Hogwarts, and she was always a little jealous that her years there had been so ordinary. With a slight lurch of disappointment, Rose made it through the barrier and onto the platform. She waited for Hugo and their father to join before making their way to the Hogwarts Express. The crowd was steadily growing as more and more families appeared through the barrier. Hugo was worrying about finding an empty compartment for him and his friends. "Oh no," Rose groaned as they got nearer to the front of the Scarlet train. "What's that, Rosie?" Ron wondered. She knew her dad hadn't been listening all those times she went on to what Hugo called her tedious tirades, and now she knew why her mother gave her those elusive answers to her questions. "Nothing, Dad," Rose said, preemptively stopping Hugo from griping about how she was upset by the steam engine. "Does here look good, Hugo?" They were about halfway down the train. "Sure," Hugo said, eyeing his sister suspiciously. Rose made fists as Hugo hoisted his things onto the train with Ron's help. She tapped her foot as she waited for them to come back outside. Before she knew it, Rose had opened Gaia's cage. "I'll see you at Hogwarts," she whispered as the owl gave a duteous hoot before flying northward. As soon as her things were stuffed into a random compartment. "Don't you want to find which one your friends are in, Rosie?" "Doesn't matter, Dad. I'm head girl." Rose waved off her dad and Hugo as they began to make their way towards the Potters, who had finally arrived and were a couple cars down. "I'll catch up with them in a minute." "Rose," Hugo called back, but Rose quickly ran out of earshot. she made her way towards the engine. After all those letter writing campaigns, writing to the editors of the Daily Prophet, the Quibbler, Witch Weekly, and more, after writing to the ministry, after getting all of those signatures for the petition, after rallying at Hogwarts, after all of that, what was it for? For nothing to get done? For everything to remain the status quo? Rose wove in and out of families, trying to say goodbye as the sun rose higher in the sky. Some of her friends tried to wave her over, but she brushed off their greetings. Finally, she was at the front of the train. The scarlet steam engine glistened in the day's brightness, polished to look brand new. Looking both ways and not seeing any conductors, Rose hopped on board in order to know for certain. She hadn't taken 5 steps onto the train when she saw the pile of coal just waiting to be shoveled into the engine. Something like a fierce growl emitted from her throat. Rose kicked a few loose pieces of coal, watching them skid across the floor. Maybe a conductor would trip over them and twist their ankle. That would teach them to think twice about using this fossil fuel again. That would... No, she'd get into heaps of trouble. But then again, she had tried to be responsible. Rose had been talking the talk for ages. She was trying her hardest to also walk the walk. No meat since 3rd year, no chemical-ridden shampoos and soaps since 4th year, only recycled clothes since 5th year, the menstrual cup since 6th year. Rose even elected to walk and take public transit here today instead of the Potter's petrol-fueled car for Merlin's sake. She was definitely walking the walk in her own personal life. But her life was not the only one on this planet. Far from it. Rose actually needed to do something right now, especially since she was head girl and president and founding member of the Council for the Liability in Managing the Affairs and Treatment of Earth. Climate. She quickly picked up the coal she had kicked and stuffed the dirty things into her pockets. She then exited the front car and peered up and down the platform again. No one had noticed her. Well, they soon would. Rose went to the very front of the train. 11 o'clock was right around the corner, and her family would soon notice her absence. She'd get into heaps of trouble. But that didn't matter if there wasn't a planet on which to get into trouble. What was a minor inconvenience compared to decades and centuries of droughts, floods, and famines? It was time for her to take direct action. Rose took a steadying breath before leaping onto the train tracks below. She took a few steps back so she could look up into the window of the steam engine. Taking out her wand, she cast a shield charm between herself and the platform so they couldn't magic her away. Enough was enough. It only took a couple moments before someone noticed her. "Oi, you! Get off the tracks!" bellowed one of the station workers. Rose stared at him and firmly shook her head. "Do you want to get yourself killed? Get off the tracks," he tried again. Rose shook her head. The worker stepped to the edge of the platform. "Damn it, you, girl, get off the bloody tracks. The train's leaving soon." "No," Rose replied sternly. "No, I will not get off the tracks." The worker swore loudly before walking off somewhere, probably to get more workers or to inform his supervisor. Rose curled her toes inside of her trainers. They couldn't move the train if she remained there, and that meant they couldn't use the coal. The next person to notice her wasn't a worker. It was Hugo. "Bloody hell, Rose," Hugo cried, seeing his older sister on the train tracks below. "I knew you were going to do something stupid, but not this." "It's not stupid, Hugo. It's civil disobedience," she answered him. "Come and join me." Hugo's eyes widened. "I'm not mental, Rose. No bloody way." He shook his head vigorously. "Come on, get off the tracks before you get into trouble." Some of Hugo's friends wandered over to where he was standing. Their eyes widened when they saw her. Then, as soon as they came, they went off again. probably to tell more of their friends. Rose kept a smile at bay. They were feeding into exactly what she wanted to happen. Rose, come on, Hugo groaned. I'm not moving. The ministry is aggravating the climate crisis by using fossil fuels, Rose cried. The station worker was back, this time with a wizard who appeared to be his supervisor. Ma'am, please get off the tracks. We're scheduled to leave in less than 10 minutes. No, not until you use a renewable energy source. I will not be compliant in using coal and further destroying our Earth, demanded Rose. She crossed her arms, gazing defiantly up at them. Ma'am, I'm going to ask one more time before calling the orders. Call them. What do I care? She shouted back. Not when so much is at stake. The station workers blinked down at her for a second. Their mouths looked like those of fish. All right then, have it your way, the supervisor finally said. I intend to, she cried. The supervisor motioned towards his inferior, who nodded and walked away. Young man, please step away from the ledge. We're closing this off, the man informed Hugo. Hugo jumped at being addressed, and Rose could see the pink of his ears from where she was standing. I, she's my sister, he finished lamely. The pink had spread to his cheeks now. Then tell her to move, griped the supervisor. Rose, come on now, please, Hugo insisted, unconvincingly stern, shifting his gaze towards the cranky man who began waving his arms at Hugo. She ain't moving with a tone like that. Now stand back and let me handle it, he roared. Oh dear, this isn't what Rose had imagined this would be turning out. Indeed, she had hoped that more people would have shown an interest into what she was doing. But how could they now, with the man now magicking rope, blocking off their view of her stalling the train? Come on, Hugo, please, Rose bit her lip. Hugo went from looking down at her to looking at the angry supervisor, back to her again. Oh, hell, he said. To Rose's utter amazement, she watched her 15-year-old brother jump down on the tracks. She lifted the shield charm in time for him to join her. If we get arrested, I'm blaming you, he told Rose with the most seriousness that she had ever heard him utter. Rose gave him a three-fingered salute. I'd have expected no less. The supervisor swore loudly. Wait until the orders come, then you'll be sorry. He began to rope off the edge of the platform. Should we tell him who our uncle is? Hugo wondered. Rose let out a laugh before glaring at the ropes. I don't think he knows I'm of age, Rose said slowly. Hugo groaned. Oh no, Rose, what are you going to do now? Rose took a steadying breath. A couple curious onlookers tried to see what the fuss with the ropes was about, but the supervisor was waving them away. Rose was certain that at least one of them had caught the Granger Weasley's bushy reddish-brown hair, and Hugo's friends were probably going to come back in droves any moment now. Improvising, Rose finally answered. I'm improvising, Hugo. She flourished her wand, and brightly colored red ribbon came from the end of it. The ribbon hovered in midair for a moment as she quickly did a few quick flicks of her wrist. In wobbly letters, the ribbon spelled carbon neutral now. Rose was squinting, reading the message slowly aloud. Rose, I don't think people will understand this one. What do you mean? She snapped hotly, turning on her brother. Hugo visibly swallowed and took a step back. He nearly tripped over the track, and Rose had to catch him. It's just that many wizards don't know that climate change is a thing. They won't know what carbon neutrality is. Rose felt her cheeks redden. But I've written loads of op-eds. Please, who reads those nowadays? Hugo snorted. Think of something they'll understand. What part of we must do something now before our planet implodes upon itself in climate catastrophe? Don't they understand? Rose, I love you, but sometimes you're too much brain and not enough people skills. Try clean air now or something, Hugo said. He glanced nervously up as some of his friends were back, bringing more people. The supervisor was trying to keep them at bay, but a few could see Hugo and Rose on the tracks below. And do it now while you still can. Grunting, Rose flourished her wand again, and a more solid, clean air now emitted from her wand. She levitated it upwards above the steam engine for the entire platform to see. Rose then pointed the wand at her throat, very aware of the pit stains forming on her shirt. We must act now, her enhanced voice wavered over the crowd. We must stop polluting our air before it is too late for our planet. The supervisor began to swear as students dove under his barricade of ropes and onto the edge of the platform. Whispers traveled through the group. Rose even saw a few parents frowning over their children. But Rose needed to keep going. We have 7 years left to act on climate change before irreversible damage is done to our planet, and we can no longer go back, Rose proclaimed. She jumped into a tirade that she had rehashed time and again with her classmates in climate. More and more people came to watch. She heard their names being spoken. She saw her relatives mosey to the edge of the platform, including their dad, who was speaking in quiet and rushed tones with their Aunt Ginny. We must stand now. We demand that the Hogwarts Express become carbon neutral. Hugo cleared his throat, and Rose had to stop himself from rolling her eyes. The Hogwarts Express must stop polluting the air now. Most of the people in the crowd cheered. The supervisor tried to get people away from the edge. Then Rose had an idea. If you're with me, join us on the tracks. Let's stop this train from leaving. A hush fell over the crowd. A few people in the back clearly agreed with her and were trying to make their way towards her and Hugo. Albus Potter and his best mate, Scorpius Malfoy, stepped in front of some petrified third years. We'll join you, Malfoy called out before they jumped down. Oh, dear Merlin, cried Albus. Little by little, students hopped down onto the tracks below. Fuck yeah, called out little Lucy Weasley. Lucy, gasped her father, Percy. Rose gave her youngest cousin a high five as she found her place amongst the swarm. The adults were screaming that the train was due to leave in only a couple minutes, but no one on the tracks was paying them any heed. Rose felt the coal in her pockets and decided to take the lead. Turning around, she felt up the lumps of coal. This is the fossil fuel that we want to do away with, she cried. No more coal! No more coal! No more coal! The phrase caught on. Rose wanted to rub it in Hugo's face that she did, in fact, have people skills and not just brains. But before she could do that, she got swept up in a human chain that was quickly zigzagging in front of the scarlet locomotive. And the nearly 3 dozen Hogwarts students stayed there for at least a quarter of an hour, well past 11 o'clock, chanting and singing for clean air, for carbon neutrality, all in the name of combating climate change. Then, when the Aurors came, they stayed on the platform, busy talking amongst the adults. Finally, an Auror addressed the students on the tracks. Attention, young witches and wizards. We're here on ministry business, and it's time for you to get off the tracks. The train's already behind schedule. When our planet's under attack, what do we do? Shouted Rose. Her climate colleagues responded. Stand up, fight back. Rose led the antiphonal chant, even after the Auror magnified his voice. We're asking you one last time to get off the tracks. Rose shouted. When our planet's under attack, what do we do? Stand up, fight back. The oars hovered at the edge of the platform, and then, one by one, they jumped down onto the tracks. "Seventh years, protect us!" bellowed a fifth-year Ravenclaw. Rose followed her classmates in casting a giant shield charm between the students and the oars. Slowly, the seventh years created a human barrier between the oars and the younger Hogwarts students, their wands held aloft towards the oars and the train. A sixth-year Hufflepuff next to Rose began to call out, "No exchanges, no refunds, environmental damage can't be undone." And so the standoff began. The oars had their wands out, but were pointing them downwards. Some of the parents and lingering student onlookers began to back up at all the wands drawn. The station workers tried to get all the onlookers away from the scene, shepherding students onto the train. Many of the Weasley adults remained, conversing about Merlin knew what. Rose's mum still wasn't there, but Uncle Harry was amongst her older relatives. He stood next to Ron, who had a half-pained, half-proud look on his face. Rose's arm began to ache from holding up her wand, but she dared not lower her wand, in fear of breaking her shield charm and causing panic. All the while, the sun shone brightly on the magical platform at King's Cross, the sweltering heat lingering as time grew closer to midday. "No exchanges, no refunds, environmental damage can't be undone. This is your final warning. Get off the tracks or there will be consequences," one warrior shouted. He raised his hands as he spoke, and his wand hit the shield cast by the seventh years, sending green sparks flying. Some of the students screamed while the lead oar motioned to the offending oar to put down his wand. Rose grinned in satisfaction as the students started chanting, "Clean air now! Clean air now!" But then she felt a tap on her shoulder. "Mom's here," Hugo hissed in her ear. Whipping her head upwards, she saw her mother, Hermione Granger Weasley, staring down at her, at the entire crowd. Without a word, Hermione hopped onto the tracks, and the oars parted as she approached the standoff. "Mom!" Hugo cried. Whispers broke out amongst the demonstrators, and the chanting slowly stopped. "Hi, Rose. Hi, Hugo," Hermione said lightly. "Mom," Rose confirmed. Then she blurted, "Would you like to join us?" Hermione's face lit up at the offer from her daughter. This morning had been so rushed, and she had been so gutted to find out that she'd missed the train leave for Rose's last first day at school. Then Hermione had caught wind of the holdup, and she had known exactly why. "I would love to, but I actually have come down to introduce you to someone." "Really? Who?" Rose barely noticed the rest of the group had grown quiet as they caught sight of the famous Hermione Granger Weasley. By now the sun was directly overhead, casting short shadows everywhere. Rose could tell that everyone was sweating too, based on the smell emitting from this horde of teenagers. Hermione gave a quick smile. "Someone who I know you've been wanting to meet. Someone who really needs to hear what you're trying to say." She turned towards the platform. "Galenus, come on down." The hairs on the back of Rose's neck rose at hearing the first name. And sure enough, Galenus Edgecombe appeared from the remaining onlookers. The balding wizard took a handkerchief to the top of his head, as his heavier robes did not fit the weather. "That's the head of the Department of Magical Transportation," hissed a fourth-year Slytherin from behind Rose. Excited murmurs traveled through the enclave of students. Up close, Galenus Edgecombe looked rather unassuming, if not a little on the shorter end. He slowly sat at the edge of the platform and scooted himself down onto the track. "Well, this is the Hogwarts student that stopped the train," he announced in his gravelly voice. "We, the students, yes," Rose answered sternly. His gray eyes slowly took in the dozens of students behind her. "Well," he gestured towards the shield, "it's kind of hard to talk with these defenses up." Gallinus, Hermione said in a warning tone. She knew that her daughter could handle a tough reception, but she also knew that the students would eventually have to get to school. What? It's true, he sniffed, crossing his arms. Once the oars get back onto the platform, we'll lower our defenses, Rose said as her comrades echoed their agreement. You're in no position to bargain with us, snapped an oar. Oh, yeah? Tell that to the train, Rose shot back. I think that's a fair request. Oars, please, Hermione spoke up. She cast a glance to their leader, who mumbled to his fellow colleagues to get moving. Everyone held their breaths as the oars retreated onto the platform. With a jolt, Rose realized that the seventh years were waiting for her signal to lower their wands and break the shield. She moved her arm down, secretly relieved at lowering it. The shield charm broke, and it was a group of Hogwarts students and two ministry officials on the tracks. Well, Miss Granger Weasley, insisted Gallinus Edgecombe. This is your chance to be head girl, she thought. Rose took a step forward. Sir, we, the students of climate, and their allies find the use of coal an irresponsible choice of fuel for the Hogwarts Express. Looking back, Rose realized that this direct action against pollution was her own adventure. Back when her parents were second years, her dad and her Uncle Harry drove a car to Hogwarts when the barrier didn't work for them. Now she was getting to Hogwarts in her own way, when the Department of Magical Transportation finally, after many letters, op-eds, and petitions, became open to a dialogue. What was better? Well, as Rose spent the rest of family holiday dinners talking about, the department listened. After that day, the Hogwarts Express no longer ran on coal. Instead, some unspeakables from the Department of Mysteries discovered a spell for long-term heat that was affordable, safe, and carbon neutral to use. Hugo, on the other hand, said the best thing about that day was not getting a detention, which always earned him a swift kick to the shin from under the table. Rose had only missed twice. Once it was to her Aunt Ginny, to whom she profusely apologized. The second time was to her Uncle Percy, to whom she uttered a half apology. When Rose and the rest of Climate negotiated with the head of Department of Magical Transportation on the 1st of September, she felt herself come into her power. Her actions, and the actions of her peers, had been a success. After all, this wasn't only her future that Rose was talking about and acting on. It was the future of the entire planet and of the generations to come. It was time that she stood up and fought back. So, for those of you joining us a little later in the stream, this is or was rather, On Track, written by Chemical Pixie, another member of our community at HarryPotterFanficTalk.com, aka HPFT. Having finished the story, I'm going to go ahead and open it up for questions to the author. Anybody who's in the live chat can feel free to ask questions there. I've also got questions of my own that I'm going to go ahead and ask, as I mentioned, via messages with our author, since we've got some functionality issues on our end at the moment. So the first question, Abby, is you've written multiple protest stories, and this was the second one of them. What makes you feel that those stories need to be written and posted right now? And again, give us a few moments while we wait for the translation here. So her answer was, we're living in a time where democracy is being threatened by bought elections and politicians. Protests are vital to any democracy because they give voice to the people, which is an excellent point, truly, during our times. I understand the story was also inspired in part by a challenge, um, which was hosted by Cheeky Tora Lex's To the Village Voice Challenge. Um, what about that challenge led you to want to be involved, led you to want to write this story in particular? And so the answer to that particular question is To the Village Voice is about standing up for what is right. Climate change is a topic of concern for me, especially as our environment deteriorates from pollution and human caused climate events. In order to prevent the world's temperature from rising 1.5 degrees Celsius, we have to cut our emissions by 70% by 2030 and be carbon neutral by 2050. This is a matter of utmost urgency. Youth are leaders in this endeavor for climate justice, and I figured that the NextGen crew would be confronted by the realities of climate change at one point. Rose, being Ron and Hermione's daughter, made her the perfect fit for our heroine. Did you, as a follow up, did you sort of uh, fuse the idea of climate being a long sort of acronym with Hermione's original idea for SPEW, or did you just want the organization to be called Climate? And so she said absolutely. Hermione chose a rather unfortunate name for her social justice issue, which, well, like I was saying, and like anybody who's watching probably knows, was spew. Um, but she said Rose was a little more creative in her name choice, and obviously, I think we can see that that is the case, and that it spells out very clearly what the point of the society is, and excuse me, what the point of the group is, and what part of society it's hoping to impact. One of the things that I noticed in the story, particularly the beginning and end of the story, was the way that you set the environment up for any readers. Any tips on how others can do the same, or anything that helps you really give us those descriptions and kind of feelings that put you in that scene. And then I'll also follow up with a question from one of our other members in the live chat. And so the response to that first question of mine was, think of the environment as a force that humans have manipulated. Humans have caused climate change. We know what normal weather is. It's been our subject of small talk for centuries. And she said she likes to take what people normally say about the weather and make it more purposeful. Climate change brings drought. London is known to be rainy, and I combine these details to create our setting in the story. London is going to see sunnier and warmer days, and it's time to admit that what we experience every day is a result of climate change. And I think that that raises an excellent point. That it's easy to say, sort of in our moment, that this is just sort of the way it is, and it may change. Um, Obviously, there are graphs that I think fairly universally, at least among the scientific community, are agreed that that is not the case. Um, but they are out there, and so I also think it's great the way that the um, story kind of confronts that in a slightly more subtle way, I guess you would say, than beating you over the head with it, which I think makes sense because of how the story also evolves into a more out and out protest with Rose and then later the students. But it also starts and comes back with that point about the sunlight and temperatures. The question that we have from the chat is from one of our members, Muggle Maybe, aka Renee. She said she loved the story and that it had a nice, happy ending. And so, Abby, what do you imagine the ending might have been if the story occurred in the real world rather than the magical world? And so she says, "Hey, hi Renee, thanks for your question. First, I really wanted to write a story where protest works. I think it's important for readers to see that this is an effective tool of activism. If this were the real world, I can see slight institutional change. Maybe the train would have run on a cleaner energy source. But what we're confronting is larger than just one train. It's an entire layer of systems that have enabled the fossil fuel industry to cover up the fact that humans have caused climate change since the 1970s. The fossil fuel industry are regular large money donors to many politicians who create policies that enable more drilling and fracking and destruction of the environment, disproportionately affecting the working poor and communities of color. Sorry. If this were the real world, Rose and her friends would be taking on the entire fossil fuel industry, which is something that we will and must face within our lifetimes. It will take more than one student group to create the system change that's needed to save our planet. I will take a less fic-based jump off from that, and it's something that sort of, I guess, always puzzled me from just even from a business thinking perspective. Obviously, these companies have profits to think about, and profits are, sort of, I think, what continues driving not doing these things, at least not without strict regulations mandating it. But something I always wondered about, and really still wonder about to this day, is these same companies that boast absolutely ridiculous profits, and really sort of corner the market, if you will, the fossil fuel market. Is I feel like it's somewhat bizarre that they would not dump a good amount of their profits into future cleaner energy sources, because it's just another market that they could corner, since they already have the resources to really plow into it. Any thoughts on that other than it just being kind of pure profiteering? And so her response was human greed, their source of property or profit, excuse me, I guess in a sense property as well, being threatened by being taken away and being used up. I think the fossil fuel industry is inherently corrupt, and that the system that they help create cannot function on their quote unquote generous sides to do the right and moral thing. Um, we should not have to rely on the wealthy to choose to do the right thing in order to save our planet. I agree 100%. Again, going back to democracy, she says, in closing, we need people to stand up to the greed. And I agree, should not have to the quote unquote 1% to handle and ensure that world international crises, really of all stripes, but especially one that threatens our entire planet. We should not have to rely on these people to fix things. And as I was saying, I think, possibly it is just pure profiteering. regardless of potential long-term thinking, business-wise, and um, politics and profit-wise. If we go too much further, I think we're going to go into a super climate tangent, uh, which may be the subject of outside discussion amongst the members. But obviously, the important thing I think in achieving one of the goals of this story is to really to drive that point home, or at the very least to drive discussions about it. Um, so I think that's mission accomplished, Abby, and uh, absolutely the last thing she wanted to mention was climate change, going beyond the environment, and also driving at racism, sexism, and classism. And so yes, certainly other points that we could fly onto, but we're not going to dive too much deeper than the road I've forced us down, into the deeper underlying politics and um, corporate and worldwide issues, we'll say. But again, this was On Track by Abby, aka Chemical Pixie, at HPFT. You can visit us directly at our URL, www.hpfanfictalk.com. The goal of the story, to bring attention to this important issue and drive action, actual action for change. 100% mission accomplished, at least in my opinion. And if you want to read the story for yourself, go ahead and check the link, which will be in the description below once the video uploads to our YouTube channel, HP Fanfic Talk. This has been Kevin, aka Title Dragon, with another Fic Night. And we hope to see you next month for October's Fic Night, which will also be toward the end of the month.